Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim, and our guest today is Michelle. So Michelle, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
I'm based in San Luis Obispo, California, and I'm the founder of To Be Honest Beverage Company. We're a non-alcoholic functional spirit alternative that replaces the liquor in your cocktail. And we're kind of just going to market this year. So we've kind of been in the initial stages of customer discovery, getting everything going. So ultimately business, marketing, sales in that realm.
So I'm curious more about your story. So what kind of made you want to start this business? What's your background and what need did you kind of see in the market to go about and start this?
So about 3 years ago, I stopped drinking. It wasn't with the intention of quitting alcohol altogether. My husband and partner is actually in alcohol production. So craft beer, mead, he now co-owns and does the manufacturing for a hard cider company. So when I transitioned away from alcohol, it was kind of odd because it was so much a part of our life. It was our culture. It was what we did with our friends. It was what we did together, festivals, wine pairings, like all of these things. And when I stopped drinking, it just sort of became this like longer term transition. It was like, oh, I'm just going to do it for a week. Okay, a month. And then it became 3 months, 6 months. And now I'm at a point where I don't really see the benefit of drinking, at least for myself, and how it impacts me mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I really stopped drinking because I was struggling with anxiety and mental health at the time. And alcohol for me really only fueled that. It promoted lethargy, lack of motivation. I didn't feel so great the next day. And at the time I was health coaching and I used to teach and coach fitness. And so I felt like it was kind of counterintuitive to everything that I was teaching, preaching, and what I wanted to practice in terms of lifestyle. And so with that, having my husband be in alcohol production, we started exploring non-alcoholic beverages. We tried functional options, we tried alternatives to wine, we tried spirit alternatives, and we just kind of didn't find anything that was offering the flavor and function that we really wanted in a product. And I have a background, I've bounced around a lot in terms of my career and my past and my entrepreneurial journey, but a lot of sales, marketing, and kind of like brand development and customer inclusion in that process. And so it kind of led us down this path for To Be Honest Beverage Company. And now, a couple years later, we're in the fire and figuring it out as we go.
Awesome. No, that's a super cool story. And then in terms of obviously it's awesome that your husband has that background. I'm sure, obviously it's still not an easy process, but it makes it easier. So talk about that manufacturing process in terms of just finding that partner to actually go and make this product for you.
So I'm a little bit lucky, I shouldn't say traditional, but a lot of CPG brands, they go to market with a co-packer or they're finding someone to make the product for them. There are those brands who start in a commissary kitchen or out of their home and then build and grow from there more organically, or the founder is super passionate about the product and that's kind of where it got started. For myself, I'm the founder in the face of our brand in terms of the representation, my story, what I was looking for, but my husband and partner, Jeremy, is the product design, product manufacturing. And so we're really lucky because we have the opportunity to, from start to finish, think about sourcing, think about where that's happening, think about how we're creating the product, and kind of not have the issues that sometimes come up with co-packers or recipes or dealing with a manufacturing facility in order to facilitate our product and bring it to market. So it's more his realm in terms of what goes into our product, the flavor profile that is developed. It took a few, test batches, obviously, lots of trial and error, some not so great options that we started with until we got to, which is our inaugural SKU and our only product at this time. It's called Focus, and it's inspired by London Dry Gin. And I was a gin drinker predominantly, so that's kind of why we launched that. It's also, from a botanical juniper forward perspective, it's very mixed in terms of what it works with. berry, floral, citrus, other botanicals. And so we just thought that that would be kind of the best direction to go from a product development perspective.
No, that makes total sense. Then in terms of like getting it out to market, like that you mentioned that you're just kind of launching it now. So what is your strategy? Are you looking to go into retail or direct to consumer, or even like you could say specialty retail? Like what is kind of your objective where you kind of see people, drinking this beverage in 2025?
So the direction that we're headed in now is definitely different than what we intended from launch. I'll tell you what we're focusing on now and kind of how that's been developed. So we're going hard with our content marketing strategy and direct to consumer. So last year we did a lot of activations. We did a lot of participation in events. We're actually in a very small area. I don't know if you're familiar with it, San Luis Obispo, California. We're right on the Central Coast, but there's only about 50,000 people in our town specifically. So we're not based in LA, Chicago, San Francisco, New York. We don't really have the same access to people in quantity and volume, locations, distribution. So our route was a little more mom and pop, a little more like test here, try this there. And we kind of found that from an ROI perspective and from a time investment and strategy perspective, it wasn't what we wanted in terms of building the brand and eventually getting it to scale to national distribution, international distribution eventually. So that being said, it is hemp infused. So we are focusing on other functional options. When you think of functional, that's really just things that it offers in terms of experience. So that's nootropics, mushroom-based, adaptogens, hemp infused. Our first style and product is that CBD and hemp infusion. We'll expand into the more functional nootropic adaptogenic options as we move forward. But that's definitely very limiting from like a national distribution perspective, the types of stores, restaurant, retail, bars that are actually willing to take that on, even though it's federally legal and we're fine to distribute and they're fine to sell. It's kind of one of those quote unquote risk profile businesses, even now in terms of payment processing and what we have access to. So that being said, it kind of deterred us from the distribution route right out the door. And so that's why we're focusing on direct to consumer. We really want to build the brand awareness, the identity, have people kind of like come to the brand and really support it, really get behind the lifestyle and what we're trying to create and change in the non-alcoholic space. And then once we kind of get through that and reach several goals and milestones, I think we'll have a lot more success if we start with regional distribution through California, and then kind of niched locations. So non-alcoholic bottle shops, non-alcoholic bars and restaurants, and those who are kind of already open to our category and our industry. And then hopefully from there, there are other brands that we watch that have been successful. Aplos is one. They launched in Sprouts over the past year. Nowadays, they've signed a distribution contract recently or in the past year or so. And so I think with time, we'll be able to evolve into the distribution strategy and hit that a little bit harder. But for right now, it's direct to consumer, local self-distribution in our county and adjacent counties, and then being able to expand and grow from there once we have the brand recognition.
So do you look to potentially, in terms of like future SKUs, kind of have bottles? I mean, obviously Breeze is like a big, company in this space, or do you kind of just want to have cans, or do you kind of just want to have like the one bottle? It's like, what is your thought process there?
I think it's important to have a mix of SKUs and differing offerings. So we launched in the bottle. So our initial product is 750 milliliter. It's 25 fluid ounces. You use it like a shot or as you would spirits. And then you mix it up into a cocktail. You blend it with sodas. You enjoy it in that capacity. We thought about launching RTD, and some of our initial business plan phase ideas was in that category. However, after having some really great discussions with other founders in the arena of RTD and canned options, it's high volume, low profit margin, and incredibly competitive shelf space. So as CPG brands launching in that arena, you've got to come to market with a lot of backing and a lot of fundraising. And we weren't in that place. We wanted to test the product. Like we launched with $10,000. We invested in our website, our logo, our branding, the actual product, permitting, licensing, et cetera. And then we just got it out in front of people. We were like, MVP, let's try it. Let's see if people like it. Well, let's see if there's a demand. Let's see if it sells. Tested it in some bars and restaurants, only about 5 as a handful, to see sell-through rate, If it was on a menu, would it sell? And really just, again, identify the customer and the target audience that we were drawing in with the product. And so that large volume canned RTD market was not the direction that we wanted to go. So that's why we went the more boutique bottle route. I also think from a direct to consumer model, bottles work a lot better. You're getting a lot more in one shipment as opposed to buying 25 cans of a product, you get one bottle. So it just made a lot more sense from an e-commerce perspective. And eventually we definitely like to launch cans. A lot of the brands that we follow, that we look up to, and that we've seen be successful in the space, they have different SKUs. They have bottle options, they have canned options, and it just kind of depends. I think from a distribution perspective, canned options and RTDs are going to be a lot more successful. And in terms of scale, that product route is the direction we'd like to go in the future, but we'll continue to introduce bottles until we feel like we're ready for that jump.
100%. Yeah, I think that you guys are going about it the smart way. It's interesting. I always have these conversations, and it's super important to look at things like profitability. And I think many founders, especially in CPG, are not looking at that. And to your point, many brands, even if they want to raise money, it's not easy right now. So you're better off going through and just starting small, getting that testing and going after things like, profitability and making sure that whatever you're selling actually makes financial sense.
Profitability has been almost like the number one thing that I started with when I launched this brand. I, told my husband and partner, I was like, I'm not doing it the alcohol route, because with his industry and background and me understanding it a little bit, a lot of times you lose money on distribution unless you're, big time, large scale. But a lot of your like local craft breweries, cideries, things like that, unless you've hit a certain level, you're not making enough money to support the sales team, to support the profit margin of distribution companies that they take as a part of the pie, the merchandising, the marketing, like everything that's a part of that cuts into that. So I aim to price our bottle at a profitable margin that would be successful for us with direct to consumer as well as wholesale. And I think you're completely right. I think a lot of CPG brands miss that from the beginning. I think in the competitive research category, they often think like, okay, how am I going to measure up? I should just come in either at the same price or even like a little bit cheaper. And then you have this competitive war in terms of price and discounts and, marking things down. And in terms of the brand identity that we wanted to bring to market, ours is slightly sophisticated, a little bit more luxury. And so we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to offer the discounts. We didn't want to come in, because I've been told, even from a pitching perspective, there was a pitch competition that I was a part of last year in New York. And in prepping for that, I met with another founder who's actually in the alcohol space. She was giving me advice on the pitch deck and on the process. And she had even recommended, if you just came to market with a wholesale and cut under at like $20 a bottle or whatever we were talking about at the time, she was like, you could completely crush it. And I was like, well, that would completely bring down the entire functional category. And in terms of the long-term success of the business and of the industry, that's not what I want to do from an ethics or like moral perspective. Could we do it financially if we got the backing and if we got enough people to take it on? Sure. Would it be profitable over time? Probably. But I think that we all have to ask ourselves as founders and business owners the ethical decisions in terms of that route and what it does to the competitive landscape and what it does to our industry as a whole.
No, it's 100%. Yeah. It's super smart that you're thinking about it this way. And I guess also, right, because you're mentioning that for you, it's kind of been direct to consumer, focusing on that channel. So how have you done that? Have you run ads? Have you done this organic content? How have you kind of gotten the word out to attract new customers?
Through the initial year, I focused a lot on public relations. So it was more pitching podcasts in the niche of sober curious or sober identity, doing features in different magazines, Proof Magazine, our local magazines, Edible Slow, things like Low to No Drinker magazine, approaching it in terms of like, how can I collaboratively be seen in the space as a founder, talk about my story, and then introduce the brand. And then again, we did a lot of activation. So our strategy in the first year was more about local. How can we impact the San Luis Obispo community? How can we align our brand? So a lot of the choices that we made, I think this is really important for brand identity. And again, I think a lot of founders miss this from the beginning in certain ways is that they'll kind of take any opportunity that comes along. I was very scrutinizing. And in the first year, we didn't do a ton in sales. We didn't do even a lot of events or opportunities, but I selectively chose those things, especially in our community, in terms of restaurants, bars, and events that aligned our brand with a slightly sophisticated luxury alternative. And so people in the community started to view our brand in a certain light. So we're going to continue to do that when it comes to influencers, affiliates, partnerships, and collaborations in the digital space. And we're just expanding this year in terms of our content marketing. So we have trialed some paid ads. We've seen some success with traffic, a few purchases here and there, but we haven't really nailed that. So what I want to focus on instead is really go at it from a lifestyle brand perspective. So when it comes to your social platforms, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, video content, Pinterest, etc., and the other platforms, that we're kind of looking at right now, I really want to hone in on the story of the person that's going to associate and affiliate with our brand. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the product and, I think Red Bull is the greatest and most well-known example is they don't market the product, they market the lifestyle and the type of person that they're drawing in. Liquid Death is also a brand that I've been watching a lot recently. I think that their success in creating a cult following and pulling in the type of person who is like, yes, that is my product. This is how I want to live. And it's just, it started as water. Of course, it's expanded into other non-alc products, but that's kind of what we're hoping to accomplish. So we haven't actually released or launched the strategy. We've done a little bit of social media content here and there. We have a small local predominantly following, but this month and the next couple of months is where we're going to start to run with that strategy of telling the individual stories of why someone is choosing not to drink, sober, curious options, that feeling of pressure, discomfort when you transition away from drinking or you're not drinking at an event, what does that look like? And that's kind of going to be the thought process in which we approach the strategy.
That makes sense. And then in terms of the local following, is that really more around the college campus or is it people outside of that, there in your community?
So we originally identified our ideal client to be a Gen Z type of, customer profile, either in school or recently graduated. That was, your young female, health and wellness, aesthetic focused. And if you look at the brand, you can kind of, I think, see that in what we've tried to cultivate. Now, of course, as we've done more customer discovery, as we've actually sold the product and learned more about who our customers really are, they're a little bit more in that older millennial category, real estate agents, business owners, people who are at a slightly different level of life and experience. They've transitioned away from alcohol for various reasons, or maybe they drink on the weekends, but they don't want to drink during the week. There's a lot of that. And so when it comes to our community, even though we are in a university town, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo is our university, very close, very prevalent, lots of younger generation folks in our area. We actually focus more on that second customer profile that I mentioned. So our events and our activities are not so much university and campus focused. I think that as we expand, one of our strategies that we'd like to pursue is an ambassador program. And I think that will center more around the college demographic. Now, we definitely have college age consumers and those who are interested in going to a party and having an alternative option or having friends over for dinner instead of going out to ragers. I think that, alcohol consumption is still very prevalent, but things definitely are changing and people are being a lot more open to alternatives and a lot more open to the spectrum of drinking as opposed to I'm either drinking all the time or I'm not drinking at all. And so I think as we see that, we'll start to see more campus engagement and we're hoping for that as we move forward.
That's awesome. So obviously now we're still in Q1 of 2025. So in terms of your biggest goals and objectives, what are you really focused on for the rest of this year?
So for the rest of this year, it will kind of be quarterly. We have a couple of things that we're focusing on and that'll roll out over time. End of this quarter and headed into this next quarter is content marketing. As much as I possibly can, curating the content that is going to get more eyes, get more impressions. You see really successful brands who have nailed that and they're doing really well in terms of e-commerce sales simply because they've been able to create that. And so that's going to be almost like my entire focus for Q2. You know, we have several events that we're participating in. There was a local festival around female-founded food, beverage, hospitality businesses in our community, and we hosted, you know, a mocktail making workshop with a collaborative partner that went really well this past weekend. A market, we have another like conscious festival, which is a bit larger, and engaging in that. But ultimately, it'll be content marketing. Around Q3, we want to introduce our next SKU, which will be a more functional adaptogenic option, but a whiskey kind of style. There's a lot of debate in the non-alcoholic world about whether you should mimic spirits or not. There are a lot of non-alcoholic spirits already on the market that do. Ritual, Seedlip, Lyre's, a lot of like your big names. And then there are a lot of other smaller brands who are like, no, create your own profile and design something that's different, that's outside the norm. We're, for the time being, fitting into the category of mimicking. I think that bars are more inclined to utilize that type of product if they understand what types of classic drinks it goes into. And that's kind of why we're pursuing that route. So that'll be around Q3, introducing that next style. We do have syrups on the docket. So we'll be introducing syrups that pair really well with our product. Those will be agave syrup based. So a lot of syrups on the market are cane sugar based. And part of our product is all about, you know, zero sugar, kind of a health and wellness option. So we'll have that release and launch. And then maybe by the end of the year, depending on how things go, we might look at picking up a regional distributor. So just kind of depending on how we're able to do in terms of self-distribution within SLO County, Santa Barbara County, Monterey County, adjacent counties, and expanding. And then, of course, you know, we use air goods and fair, which is really common for kind of like your smaller, just getting going CPG style brands with your more like niche retail restaurant locations. And so we'll do that from a national perspective. We've had people order from us throughout the country. And so we'll continue to do that. But yeah, who knows? By the end of the year, if everything goes great, maybe we'll have a great regional distribution partner. So we'll see.
Awesome. Super exciting stuff. So I guess on that note, right? So if you could go back in time to before you started this business, what is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
So I'm definitely big on advice. I reflect all the time about my experience and story. I have had a little bit of a foray into business before this, predominantly in the digital space, creating brands, you know, as a part of the marketing and sales background. It's all kind of been leading up to this point. But I genuinely think that so often business owners, entrepreneurs, founders, we enter the space with a big vision, a big idea, and then we set expectations on ourselves in terms of what we need to do in the first quarter or the first year, whether that's sales, revenue, et cetera. How the brand is supposed to look, you know, visual identity, the website, our social media following, and all of the other categories, what it's meant to be like for you. And I think a lot of times we lose ourselves in the expectation and we get distracted by those things that we feel like we should be doing, should have accomplished by now, should have had this in place. Oh, it should look this way. And I think we hold on to those a little too tightly. And so the advice that I would give myself is to let go of a lot of the hard controlled like things that I want to have my hands on and release a lot of that and just approach it with more fun and a lot of curiosity and a lot of just, hey, let's trial this and consider it an experiment. Like you're not going to reach that many people. Like, you know, 10 million people aren't going to see what you're doing in the very beginning. Maybe 100 people are, maybe 1,000 people are, but like give yourself the opportunity to try and fail really, really fast and to let go of the expectation of it has to look really great. I have to have this put together. I've got to look totally legitimate as a founder, as a business owner, as a brand in order to even launch and get started. So that's like the one biggest piece of advice. And then I will always say, start marketing and selling way before you think you're ready. Like build the brand online, get the following, like do that even before you have a product. And then like that will change everything for you. If you can get people behind what it is that you're creating from a lifestyle perspective, from an identity perspective, that'll make the sales process and the launch so much more successful.
That's good advice. And that's super true. I always tell our team, like, yeah, it doesn't always matter how many people view it. It's about getting in front of like the right people. So you can have like 1 million views, but if there are people who would never purchase your product or services, it kind of defeats the purpose. So I guess on that note, if somebody watching this wanted to reach out to you, wanted to find your website, Do you mind sharing that here just so we can get in contact and find you guys?
Yeah. So our website is tobehonestbev.com. That's TOBE honest, BEV, like beverage.com. We spend most of our time on Instagram right now. To Be Honest Bev, same in the terms of handle. And then TikTok as well will be launching this month.
So, Michelle, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Dan.